So we're 3 games into this series now by the time of this recording, and here are my biggest takeaways, thoughts, and reactions through halfway into it. First things first, this ball pressure from Houston has been bothering the Warriors at an alarming rate. Guys are getting sped up and making terrible mistakes, which are making jobs easier for Houston. The first thing is ball handling. If you haven't guessed, this team doesn't have a ton of ball handlers. There's Steph, there's Jimmy, and at times Draymond, but besides them, no one here can handle this type of pressure. Pods is folding like crazy, Moody can't handle the ball, same goes for GP2. I'm not even lying, the next best ball handler on this team is Pat Spencer, and we'll talk more about him later on, but the main issue here is Steph, and he's not doing a good job handling the ball very well. In my series preview, I made such a big emphasis on Steph needing to be strong with the ball and securing it in order to make plays, and he hasn't been great. He's getting pickpocketed in the backcourt, he's getting the ball tied up, and the weirdest thing is that he's running into help. We already know that they're going to send 2 to him on every action, and he's trying to dribble through the defense. He'll have 2 on the ball and take forever to get rid of it, or he might not even get rid of it. He'll just turn it over. Something that he needs to do more to combat this is taking like an escape dribble away from the blitz so he can get the pass off to an outlet. That buys him more time to read the defense, because too often he's trying to do things in one motion. This approach of him trying to like split the screen or dribble through it is not it. But in game 3, he was much better at getting the pass off to the short roller. He was also turning the corner quickly and meeting the screen defender when he got to the level early, rather than letting the screen defender meet him and dictate the intensity. That is something that Steph has to do more, rather than sometimes trying to look for the pass. The second thing is missing kickouts. We're not getting to the rim very often against this Houston defense, but when we are, guys are either taking contested shots at the rim that they cannot make against the length and size from this Houston team, or they'll get caught in the paint, try to kick it out too late, and it becomes a total reset. And for me, I think this is because Houston's defense is forcing guys to rush their decision making, so they end up overthinking because the amount of missed kickouts are insane. Like point blank, a guy will miss a shooter wide open in the corner or off a shake, or the pass comes too late. But at the same time, the Warriors don't really have a whole lot of great decision makers. Outside of the core 3, this team is a relatively young team that doesn't really have experience playing high level basketball, but it's also not the young guys' fault. Because even a guy like Draymond has been making some of the most CTE passes I've seen, and I hate this about Draymond. Specifically how he can be such a good passer, but he can also make such boneheaded decisions that sway the momentum of the game. He like passes the ball before a guy is even ready for it. And it gets to the point where it's like, okay, you need to tighten up. But the point is, moving forward in the series, I think it's important that guys need to make the open pass out to the 3-point line, because us making shots is one of the biggest keys to beating this Houston team. There's quite literally no other way for us to definitively beat this team unless it's making perimeter shots. You guys already know, before Jimmy Butler, we were literally the worst layup shooting team in the league. Clearly, we're not good at making layups. So when we do get to the rim, we have to spray it out, and guys just have to finish plays by making shots. The last thing is dribble penetration. This Warriors team is not a team that can get to the rim through dribble driving. They depend on either Steph or Jimmy doing it through advantage creation, and then they'll get to the rim through off-ball movement. Houston was ball pressuring like crazy. All 5 players were glued to us out in the perimeter, so much so that driving gaps were so big, there's literally so much space on the court, yet none of these other players can put pressure on the rim. I mentioned this in my role player video that I posted a month or 2 ago, and you know who actually did get to the rim? Pat Spencer. He checked into the game and gave the Warriors phenomenal minutes, being practically the 13th man on this team. He was easily beating his matchup and finishing at the rim and even cutting off the ball, and it begs the question, should he get more playing time? Because I would consider it. Maybe not consistently, but if you need a good boost off the bench, I would go to him. Even though I'm not high on Pat as a ball player, in this matchup, his rim pressure is a valuable asset. On top of that, he's actually a smart basketball player, so I wouldn't mind Pat playing bigger minutes in the series due to what he brings to the table. So in my series preview, I talked about how the Warriors should be guarding the 2 best players on the Rockets, and I suggested that we need to defend the pick and roll to where we're forcing Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet to take long 2s. I talked about how Jalen Green is an okay above the break shooter because he's inconsistent. When he has it, then it's on like how it was in game 2, but when it's off like in game 1, oh, the faucet is off. But one thing remains consistent is that he's not as comfortable shooting pull-up 2s. And if he's going to beat us by shooting pull-ups, then he's going to do it by shooting pull-up 2s, not 3s. In game 1, we were doing that. We were very disciplined in our drop and ice coverage, where we were funneling him downhill to make plays. He obviously wasn't very good at that, and we succeeded in that game plan. In game 2, He started to attack the drop coverage and his downhill decision making was a lot better. And I think the Warriors overreacted to this, so eventually they started to try to come up to touch, but Jalen Green was beating it very easily, so they opted to switch. And when we switched our bigs onto him and we gave him all this room to operate, then he can dictate the pace he wants to play at. So I thought this was a mistake. We should have stuck to our base coverage, but part of the issue isn't tactical, but rather execution. Like Loon and Post were really bad when coming up to the level. They offered pretty much no resistance in staying in front of Jalen Green and didn't even bother being active. Their hands weren't up, they weren't disrupting the pocket pass, they weren't making things tough. But another thing is our perimeter defenders are just dying on screens. When you die on a ball screen, you force the screen defender to have to switch, even if they're playing a drop. Moody, GP2, and JK have been assigned to guard Jalen Green, and all of them haven't been great. We already know what Moody isn't good at on defense, and with the type of athlete that Jalen Green is, he just can't keep up with him. GP2 is as good as toast on defense. It's getting to the point where we don't actually even have him out there for defensive purposes, even though he's quote-unquote guarding the best player. He dies on screens a lot on this team, and he's just not good enough to consistently be a POA guy. But JK, on the other hand, through watching the tape, it's clear to me that he's probably the best guy on this team to guard Jalen Green. He's athletic enough to match Jalen Green, and he's the one that can keep up with Jalen Green getting downhill, or he can cut him off and recover to contest a step back pull-up. He's also big enough to wall up Jalen Green. Out of all three of these guys, JK looks like he has the best potential to bother a guy like Jalen Green. Now obviously Steve Kerr doesn't trust him, and he's going to present offensive issues, because make no mistake about it, his minutes in game 2 were horrible. But because of this matchup, I would consider leaning into JK more as the primary defender on Jalen Green, and instead place Moses Moody on a guy like Fred VanVleet. GP2 had a big game in game 3, and a majority of it just came from his offensive role and what's demanded of him, which is the screen and roll work. GP2 is the size of a guard, but he plays much bigger than that. He's actually the second best player when it comes to being a connector on this team, with Draymond being number 1. But his presence is crucial for beating schematic things that Houston is doing, which is switching everything from positions 1 through 4. Any action, it doesn't matter if it's pick and roll, off screening, DHO, they're willing to switch everything because we're not the type of team to attack switching through ISOs. Instead, the Warriors counter it with a lot of movement and passing. We're one of the few teams in the league that doesn't have to ISO or post up to take advantage of switches. And for the first 2 games, we were struggling to pick apart the 1 through 4 switching scheme from Houston because our execution was just bad. Like, it had nothing to do with strategy, we were just not slipping and ghosting screens enough or executing switch beaters effectively. At times, guys wouldn't slip out of screens quick enough to free up space for an outlet, but GP2 in the 4th quarter was slipping out of screens tremendously, but another thing he was doing was the fake handoff, and he was essentially keeping it and getting downhill. The Warriors as a team can't drive the ball to the basket, but they can get to the basket through playing within the system, and GP2 is one of the better and smarter guys on the team who can do it at a high level in the playoffs. Overall, this is the main thing that they have to do. Besides guarding the Jalen Green pick and roll, besides having the correct matchup on Jalen Green, besides making shots, besides handling the ball and making good decisions, this is a crucial part because remember, this roster isn't talented. This roster is pretty much built to play off of Steph. So when you can't generate offense, you have to do your job correctly while playing off of Steph.